Now I think we can all agree that it's unanimous that the Honda RUNE is the greatest motorcycle Honda ever made, and also the best value. I'm gonna show you all right now. Now in the manual of this motorcycle, it says very bold, forged from the soul of the Valkyrie. Now it has a lot of Thorish and Nordic god imagery inside of it, but what they're actually talking about is this. The Valkyrie, the Honda Valkyrie. This is the FB, and this is the bike that came out before the RUNE. This is the original muscle cruiser bike built off the Goldwing chassis. And these things were made from 1997 to 2003. Then comes the Honda Valkyrie RUNE, which is like, if that was kind of like an afterthought, like let's take the Goldwing and turn it into a cruiser bike, kind of compete with Harley. It was all just a big test to see how this thing would do. And then in 2003 to 2005, they came out with this bike. And it is amazing. Rumor has it that they made, I think, 1,200 of them total, but only 999 were actually made for the United States market. Now, when this thing came out, it was not cheap. It was by far their flagship motorcycle. The Honda Goldwing was $17,000. This is $10,000 more than the Goldwing. This was still $7,000 than the most expensive Harley Davidson. In fact, this was actually $3,000 more expensive than the most expensive Honda Accord at the time. But the crazy thing is, Honda was losing about $90,000 every time they sold one. Because this bike was not made to make money. This bike was Honda flexing and saying, look what I can do. When you go to other brands and other manufacturers, these are the same levers, the same gauges, the same, these are a lot of the same pieces, because that makes sense when you're trying to make a profit on a motorcycle. When you're trying to make the best, coolest thing you possibly can, you make everything original, like this bike. The clutch brake reservoir. No other motorcycle in the world has the same one. This whole piece, this is all designed for this bike and nothing else. Pretty much everything is. Now, they do take the 1800cc Goldwing motor, but it's still not the same thing, and you have a lot of unique parts. They also run the same 5-speed transmission, but everything else was unique to the motorcycle, which is why it was so expensive. Normally, it costs a lot of money to build a bike, but with economies of scale, when they make hundreds of thousands of them, they make their money back. When they make 1,200 of them, they never did. That's what makes it so awesome and so rare. So the RUNE is powered by an 1832cc liquid-cooled, horizontally opposed 6-cylinder. Pretty much the engine from the Goldwing. And it's accompanied by the 5-speed gearbox also in the Goldwing. And it makes around 120 horsepower, but the craziest number is not the horsepower number. It makes 80% of its torque at idle, which means it makes around 90 foot-pounds of torque at idle. Now, parts on this motorcycle are not cheap, and even when they came out, were not cheap. If you broke this thing and you tucked the whole front forks and you had to replace them from Honda, you were looking at around $18,000. Now, I mean, if you can find them, I couldn't imagine how much they're gonna cost. Now, when looking at this motorcycle, I know what you're thinking, you're like, Sean, it's a pretty big bike. And you're right, it's a very big bike. It actually has a longer overall length than a Boss Hoss by like 5 inches. This is a 109-inch length, ginormous. This is longer than the Goldwing, this is longer than all the Harleys. The only 3 bikes that I could find that are longer than this was one, the Victory Vision, which is a ginormous bike. It's 1 inch longer. The other bike is the Road Dog, which is now sitting at Wheels Through Time. The other bike was a bike that me and Craig made, which was like 100-something feet to break the record. Other than that, most likely, if you roll up with this bike, you probably have the biggest bike out there. Now, another interesting thing about this bike is it's not actually the easiest bike to work on. 1, because most techs have never seen one, and 2, because they didn't design it to work on it. They designed it to look awesome and function really well. Like to get that back tire off, you have to take the whole back fender. If you put a normal motorcycle jack underneath there and try to jack it up, like one in your garage, it's gonna mend and bend chrome. That's why they sell this piece. When I bought it, it came with this guy that goes underneath it. This pin gets pushed through, and then you can jack it up off of this. There's plenty of things that are easy, like adjusting things and changing fluids and stuff like that, but in general, if you're looking for the easiest bike to maintain, this probably is not it. But if you're the coolest, this is the one. Now, another really cool thing about this bike, and if you don't know it, it might take you a long time to find it, is how you get the seat off. Now, a lot of times there'll be in the ignition, you turn it a different way and it pops the seat, or sometimes there's a lever somewhere that you reach around and you try to find. This one's really, really clean, and it took me a long time to find it. It's over here. Come over here. That pops the back seat off. Very, very clean. You would never find it back there. You would almost never even know to look for it back there. Now, normally when a manufacturer says, hey, we're gonna here's a concept bike, and they show you this cool picture, and it's like, oh, that's awesome. It never happens. It goes to the bean counters, and it looks uglier and uglier, and it never looks that cool. This is actually a situation where the concept actually became the real thing. And there was a lot of argument, internal arguments between the designers and the engineers who were actually trying to put it together. And this was the end result. I mean, they spent tons of time just on the radiator trying to figure out how to make that cool the bike down and look as cool as it's supposed to. Because the Goldwing actually has 2 different radiators on both sides, so they have to jam that in one that goes right on the front, because obviously you can't have a big giant radiator on the side, and it would ruin the bike. So this bike only came in 3 different colors. You came with double black, that's the super black one. They have a black cherry, that's kind of the darker red one. Then you have illusion blue being the rarest of them all, and that's what this is. And when you're inside, you're like, it's blue, totally blue. When you get to certain light on the outside, you're like, it's kind of purple. It's really, really cool looking color. One of the runes that came to the United States, one of the 999, was completely chromed out. There was some connection with Pamela Anderson. They had her set up where she was gonna ride off on a chromed out Honda Rune. It was pretty cool looking. If anyone knows where that bike is, I'm gonna find it. Comment below, trying to find that chrome rune. Now, because they made so few of these motorcycles, it wasn't very advantageous for the aftermarket companies to start making stuff for it, because you really had no customers. You had very few customers to buy it. So that's why a lot of times when you see aftermarket parts on a Honda Rune, you look at it and you're like, that looks so awful. They spent so much time engineering the bike to look like the way it is. When you change anything, it doesn't fit. It doesn't really work. I've seen people put aftermarket exhaust on these things, and the exhausts on these bikes are perfect. I actually have another aftermarket seat for this thing. It looks awful. I've seen bags that go on the side. I think it ruins the whole look of the bike. This is one of those bikes that just looks perfect the way it is, and it should be left the way it is, with one exception. And now when I got this bike, it had some stuff on it. It had some pegs back here, and had some LED lights on, and some little goofy stuff. I took it all off, with the exception of, and I've never seen this before, of these guys. And this is really clean, really nice, sleek looking highway pegs that just, they fold up inside the bike, and they look like they belonged on this thing, even though they don't. It looks amazing. So I'm pretty pumped about that. Or at least I'm pretty sure. My other ones never had this. I'm pretty sure this is aftermarket. I guess I could be wrong. Now, when the Runes came out, a lot of collectors picked them up. They knew they were rare. They knew how to spend a lot of money designing them. They knew it was something that they'd never seen before. So a lot of times they would get picked up by collectors and then just stored and never really ridden. It's cool, I get it. Most of them have around 4,000 to 5,000 miles on them. Every once in a while you see one with 70,000 miles, and you gotta have respect for that guy, because it's a great running bike. Kind of the concern that happens when you buy a bike and you store it is what happens to one of the Runes that I bought. And every piece that was chrome was flaking, and the zinc was starting to come out, and it was all peeling. The bike needed a total tear down and re-chromed, which would have cost probably a lot more money than the bike's worth. And what happened was that some guy bought the bike, stored it in a storage unit. The storage unit roof collapsed, got moisture inside, and just pretty much ruined the whole bike. Now, it still ran good, it looked cool, but just every piece that was chrome was messed up. It was getting sharp too. It was all peeling off. There's more metal in this motorcycle than a Harley. You hear a lot of Harley guys and they'll be complaining, oh, I don't want those Japanese bikes because they're all plastic. That's not the case with this bike. That's plastic, that's plastic. Everything else, these are plastic. Almost everything else is metal and chrome and really gorgeous looking. So here's another problem. Sometimes I'm working on my bike or just hanging out with my Honda Rune, and then I get hungry. So what I do is I come over here, I reach in my little tiny fridge, and I grab a Factor meal. Now they say you can only have 2 of these 3 things: healthy, fast, and inexpensive. Well, Factor's kind of pushing the boundaries of that, because with Factor, you get all 3 of them. The meals are healthy, they taste great, they're super fast, they're normally about 2 minutes, and it's significantly cheaper than going out to eat. The other cool thing about Factor meals is they eliminate the hassle of prepping, cooking, and any cleanup. You just heat it up and enjoy. And right now I got grilled pork chop, smoked cheddar, cauliflower grits. So head to factor75.com or click on the link below and use code Srkcycles50 to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month order. That's code Srkcycles50 at factor75.com to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month's orders. Let's go back to that Honda Rune. Now, probably the coolest and most unique feature about this bike is the front end. And there's the very cool trailing bottom link fork suspension. Now, Honda did not design it. They did a really good job at it, but it was like the concept was, I think, originally came out with Indian, but then BMW also used it a lot in the older motorcycles. Now, they say this bike weighs around 850 pounds. Some people say it weighs 1,000 pounds. We're gonna get to the bottom of that right now. Hey, Joe, how do we do this thing? We just push it up on these? Oh, it's kind of settling. Hold on. Let's let it settle. So now we know it has a wet weight. It's pretty much full on fuel of 881. It's a pretty big bike. There's a lot to experience by just looking at it. It's a beautiful bike. It's fun to look at. It is an art piece. But the only way to really experience the Rune is take it for a spin. Let's go ride it. All right, guys, before we do the ride, let's do the words of wisdom. Psalm 27:14, wait for the Lord, be strong, and let your heart take courage. Wait for the Lord. So the first thing you notice when you drive this monster of a motorcycle is, one, how long it is. The distance between my chest or my head and the front of that bike is, I don't know, 5 feet, 4.5 feet. It's ginormous. There's nothing hard about it. It's an easy riding bike. If you can ride an Ultra Classic, or if you can ride a VTX 1800, or any of those other bikes, you would love riding this thing. The other cool thing about it is, for a motorcycle in this configuration, this like cruiser style configuration, you will almost never find anything smoother than this motorcycle. And definitely not anything smoother at the time. Now, there are smoother bikes, the K1600, GTL, the BMW, but that's not in this. That's not in a cruiser bike configuration. That's a sport touring bike. It's very different. But this thing rivals anything out there in terms of smoothness. And then the delivery of the power feels awesome. Love riding these bikes. Now, one of the benefits of that front suspension is watch when I hit a bump. The tire is always planted on the ground. If you're in like gravel or slippery stuff, your tire's always going to be planted, and it's less likely for it to slide out. The negative is there's just a lot of extra weight, and it's a big, heavy bike. So that's kind of the game. Now, this bike is 20 years old. I can put antique tags on this motorcycle. It does not look like a 20-year-old bike. It doesn't feel like a 20-year-old bike. It is fuel injected. I believe it's a linked braking system where I grab the front, it grabs some rear, you grab the rear, grab some front, and all the brake lines are all steel braided. But it's so cool how all these things right in here, they all kind of flow and line in with each other. And every piece of this bike was meant for this bike and this bike only. Also, the front headlight really looks like the head of the robot from the Netflix show Lost in Space. Now, this particular bike, I believe, sat for a long time, had some bad gas in it, and we're still cleaning that out. So it seems like every time I run it, it runs a little bit better. I don't think it's actually running at its full potential, but it's pretty close. When I was first riding, it was really spitting and sputtering. We sucked out all the bad fuel, put some good fuel in there, and we're still in the process of getting that good fuel, all the way through the injectors. So you might be wondering how the Rune rides on the highway. Well, I'm cruising highway speeds. I think the highway speeds are 75, and it runs awesome.
I mean, it feels great. It's extremely stable. You know, for a big heavy bike, it's quick, very nimble. But just, you know, when they designed this, you know, the guys at Honda are known for being engineers, and they don't just they're rarely ever the first ones to come out with something. Oftentimes the last. But when they come out with something, they dialed it in. They take their time. They want to make sure it's a nice running bike. So that's what's and it runs great. It feels great. We're hitting bumps on the highway. One-handed, no-handed, Mom. Look at me, Mom. No hands. And all it wants to do is just go. And obviously, because it's sporting the Gold Wing engine, you know, if I wanna drop a gear and accelerate and pass somebody, I've got more than enough to do that. Something interesting about this bike was it wasn't really made to ride with a passenger. You can see that the seat's not really made for it. They didn't really put pegs. They do have a spot that you can put pegs. When I got this, they had pegs in there. They had a different seat. The seat looked ugly. Aftermarket seats on these bikes always look ugly. Actually, I did have one that had an ostrich skin seat, and that was pretty cool looking, actually. Now this thing claims a really quick 0 to 60 time. See if we can get something close to it. Yep. Alright, that was pretty bad. That was a really bad launch. I wanted a little more RPMs. But still, you know, considerably quick. One of the interesting things about the Honda Rune is that a decent amount of these actually sat on the shelf when they were trying to sell them. Now, I mean, it's really hard to get them. They've gone up in value, but there was a time where they you know, a lot of them got picked off real quick. A lot of them got given away to celebrities to try to, you know, boost the concept of it. But initially, they kind of dropped in value, and they were having a hard time selling them. And then in the past, you know, 10 years, they've really started to pop off because of the scarcity of them. And, you know, for whatever reason, now they're really going up in value. And I wanted to make sure that I was able to scoop up one before they got too incredibly expensive. It's not one of those bikes that you can just, you know, you buy it and you look at it. You can actually enjoy it, and not just like you can actually really enjoy it, because it's a really fun bike to ride, and it's a very, you know, there's nothing else out there that really feels like this. The closest thing I can compare it to is this feels like what you would think a Star Wars speeder would feel like, because so much of it is in front of you. So I love these things. I'm probably gonna keep this one for I'll probably just keep this one, and maybe one of these days me and Jay Leno will go for a ride on our Honda Runes. All right, guys, that wraps it up. Remember, it is not what you're riding, but where you're going. We'll see you guys next time. What great timing, or awful timing. That's a pretty good rain right there. Guy in front of me is like, let's go slow right now.